Hey, this is Tim Ellis, and I am back with another cool art lesson. This one is actually going to be an art history lesson. So stick around, and I'm going to give you my very, probably questionable overview of art history. And what I mean is there's a lot of people who dedicate their lives to becoming art historians, and that's awesome. And they know so much more than me. There's so much to learn, but it can look a little crazy. Like, why has art changed so much through history, and what the heck are these people that are having solo exhibitions and have work in museums? What are they doing? Because it looks crazy, to a lot of people. And my students often say, "Hey, Mr. Ellis, my little brother could do that," and sometimes that's true. So, what's going on? So let's take a look together, huh? All right. So right now, I would like to say that most art has a few purposes, and up until really the era of modernism, which is, I'm going to group almost everything before modernism into a very simple category, but I want to kind of debunk a myth that you will hear over and over again. And I was taught this, and I used to believe this, which is basically that up and until the Renaissance, and if you're not familiar with what that is, I'll explain that in a minute, all art was basically amateur and crude. There was no ability. The artists were all basically terrible. I'm going off script here a little bit, but with no ability at naturalism. Naturalism is a fancy word that means, hey, that art looks real, looks realistic. So no ability at naturalism, an inability to draw in perspective, to make things look dimensional in space. Small things are in the background, big things are closer towards us. How do you make those angles? That really, up and until the Renaissance, no one was capable of any of these art abilities. And the perspective and realism, there was an art education was completely lacking, and that people were basically stupid until the Renaissance, and that all art kind of reflected this. And I have some key pieces here on display to kind of prove this point that, oh my gosh, look at this dragon, and look at this person supposed to be holding the baby Jesus, and he looks like an aphid, and these people's heads look like that one episode of Star Trek where they have the gigantic dome heads, and what is happening here? And then on the far left, you're looking at this guy in this castle, and the perspective is just bonkers. So what the heck is with that? So that's the myth. Let's see if it's true. All right. So one of the things that you'll see in art is really most art up until the invention of the camera. And I'm going to kind of break art history into before the camera and after the camera. Most art was kind of unchanged. And like I said before, a lot of people will say that at the Renaissance, art completely radically changed. And I really don't think that that's true. There definitely was some change, but not like you would expect. And the reason I have this image here is because the purpose of a lot of art was to convey information and to teach historical or religious lessons. And the reason for that is because by the year 1900, only about 12% of people on planet Earth could read or write. And that is a crazy statistic. At this point, I just looked it up, we're at like 86% of people on the Earth can read or write, which is pretty good. But up until 1900, that was not the case. And 1900, not that long ago. We think of the world as pretty mechanized and pretty educated by 1900. So this is late, and a lot of stained glass educational religious art was way before that, but this was still a main way of teaching people things. So in case I was unclear, people were taught through pictures because they couldn't read or write. So if you wanted to teach someone about early Christianity, or if you wanted to teach someone about the Buddha, or if you wanted to teach someone about who Emperor Nero was, you would use pictures. So we see a lot of art the main purpose of art before the camera, I'm going to say, was to teach religious or historical ideas. So we know a lot of it was religious, and there's all sorts of cool symbolism, and you can unpack this for volumes and volumes of books about the symbolism and the hand positions of the people being painted and the physical position of them and what are they wearing and what's going on behind them. And there's all this these layers of intricate information. And there's even a whole art of iconography where people are making icons to teach religion as well. So remember, before the camera, a lot of art was doing this. All right, and I broke down some history here, and I will. I'll put a link to this slideshow if you wanted to read more of it. But basically, breaking human history into the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, the early modern period, the Age of Enlightenment, and the modern era. And really what we've been taught is that art changes dramatically in each one of these eras. But basically, the Dark Ages, which were up until the year like 1000, and then the Middle Ages up until about 1500, everybody was terrible. No one understood perspective. No one could draw realistically. I'm saying that's not true. All right, so we talked about the camera. So the camera was invented in 1816 and popular by the early 1900s, but this changed the purpose of art and the art in history and art and culture. So the main purpose of art before the invention of the camera was to convey history, whether it's religious history or whether it is history. So in the center, you're seeing a statue of Emperor Nero, who was a really rotten guy and invented ways of torturing and killing people. So in the Roman Empire, Nero rides up on his chariot surrounded by a bunch of guards. If you're like, hey, who's that guy? And you have no idea, you might be his next victim. So it was important to know who your leaders were. And, you know, one of the things that artisans and artists did is literally sculpt and draw emperors and kings and queens on money. So even today, we've got pictures of people on our money. The reason you probably know what George Washington and Abraham Lincoln look like is because you carry them around in your pocket. And if you're really lucky, Benjamin Franklin, because he's the $100 bill. So I've got a picture of the Last Supper here and the death of Socrates on the far left. And that's because these images would tell us about wars and how someone died and who someone that rules your nation looks like. Because remember, we're so used to photography being on our phones and being able to literally zip information to someone far away from us and being like, hey, take a picture, send it to my friend. Hey, this is what my uncle looks like. Hey, I'm with my friends in college. This is what they look like. Look at my new apartment. That did not exist. And if you wanted to show someone what your home looked like, you would have to hire someone to paint it and then send it by messenger to them. And it might take months to get there, depending on where your friend lived. And you couldn't afford that anyway. Nobody could. So really the only people who were painted were incredibly famous aristocrats or people with lots of money, or a lot of art was commissioned by churches. The Catholic Church was the main patron of the arts until the Renaissance. And so that part is true. But my point is, we are not going to see a lot of change in art until the invention of the camera. And why is that? Well, let's take a look and see if we can figure it out. And if you are an art history buff, you're probably cringing right now and saying, this is a gross generalization of art history. I admit it, that's true. But let's look at it together. Okay, so here are some images that I think really prove my point. Okay, on the far left, the Three Graces. This piece of art, this was a mosaic, and it was in Pompeii in the 1st century. So we're talking, the first 100 years of our modern calendar, this was a piece of art. So notice, pretty realistic, looks a lot like Renaissance work. I'm about to show you a Renaissance painting of the same thing, and they're almost identical. Look at this painting in the center screen, done AD 14 of Aline. This is a really realistic piece of art. The colors are realistic. The perspective on the face, probably not the right word. It's not really perspective on the face, but what I'm saying is the visual depth, the three-dimensionality of it, the overall naturalism in her features is amazing. And then look over here on the far right. Now we're jumping forward 1,436 years to John van Eyck, and notice the incredible attention to detail here. Pre-Renaissance, by the way. Incredible perspective. If you zoom in on this, you can see reflections in glass, and I'm not sure if this one has a mirror in it, but some of this guy's work has mirrors with crazy reflections in it that even today would be incredibly challenging to do with all of our modern technology. So now notice on the far left, pretty realistic already. Same with the centered piece. Looks a lot like Renaissance work that we're about to see in the next image. And then on the far right, I'm showing you work from 1436 that is already incredibly realistic. All right, so here is the Three Graces on the far bottom left. And this one, it's off my screen, but this is by Raphael on the far left. Notice this painting on the bottom left. Same piece that's in Pompeii here, and he knew that. He wasn't hiding that. This was a common piece of art that was made over and over by a lot of different artists, but we're really not seeing a lot more detail than we did right here. As a matter of fact, I would argue that the Pompeii piece has a little bit more dimensionality in it than Raphael's piece. And in the bottom right, in the creation of Adam, classic Renaissance piece. Notice we're seeing a lot of the same anatomy that we're seeing in the Three Graces, and it's really not that much more realistic than any of these paintings I just showed you from the first century. So there are definitely some terrible examples of art from the Middle Ages and Dark Ages, but we have bad art today. We still are making bad art. And then in the upper right hand corner, I'm also showing you some more Renaissance work, very similar to what we just saw in the prior slide. So I really don't think there's a huge change in art. Now at 1440, we had the printing press that was invented by Guggenheim. The first book was printed. It was the Gutenberg. The Gutenberg Bible was printed on the printing press, and that's a picture of good old Gutenberg in the upper left-hand corner, and working on his manuscripts that were then printed. And we do see some changes in art as the printing press was invented. The printing press, along with the publication of the Bible, is supposed to have caused the Protestant Reformation and kind of all this knowledge being transmitted to people, and the share of public information, because things could be mass distributed and people learned to read and write more rapidly because books were available. You might just think, wow, people were illiterate because they were stupid. Well, no, books were hand copied. And so it was like buying a new car, incredibly expensive for people of that time and rare. And literally books were chained up because you wouldn't want someone walking away with it because they were so incredibly valuable. So once the printing press came into existence, suddenly information could be disseminated really quickly, and we could share information more rapidly. And we do see some change in art. On the next slide, I put a whole bunch of information about what we see happening, and even pieces of art that were woodcuts and things that were printed in books became more available to artists so that they could look at them and see other people's prints and pieces of art, and that was all great stuff. But notice where even this image of Gutenberg is pretty crude, and we're really not seeing a big change in our art yet. Okay. This guy, and he's off screen, unfortunately. I'm not quite sure why that is. Oh, it's because my monitor is a little bit bigger. But Hieronymus Bosch, 1482. This guy's a little bit of an anomaly, hard to say, because his work is crazy. Let me show you some close-ups. We're seeing people being sawn in two by bird people, and people being thrown into furnaces, and eggs being pierced with things that have eyeballs on them, and people inside of them, and a torture chamber inside somebody's body, and ears being sliced in half, and giant scary faces. So Bosch, these were all paintings. A lot of them are depictions of hell. One of these pieces is called The Garden of Earthly Delights, and all commissioned by the Catholic Church, and he was supposed to be depicting heaven and hell and life here on earth. Now, Bosch, wow, crazy stuff. Now, one of the things that's amazing about Bosch's work, again, pre-Renaissance, we're seeing pretty realistic, very crazy, very interesting work. But the one thing that I would say he starts to deviate from is you'd see crazy amounts of self-expression in Bosch. So he's kind of an anomaly. But most artists so you didn't see a huge variation in style in art really until the invention of the camera. But I had to mention Bosch because, wow, it's almost surreal, except that he's actually trying to depict something that he is very invested in. So surrealism, we'll talk about that in a minute, is not about things we know, it's what we don't know. Okay, I love these guys, the pre-Raphaelite artists. We've got Millais, we've got Waterhouse. We see a lot of people kind of floating in water and things like this. And this art is right about the time that the camera is starting to really come into play. And one of the things you will notice in this work is a high level of attention to detail and color. There's a lot of spiritual elements in this art, but still we're not seeing a huge departure from what we've seen prior. We're still seeing lots of detail. If you think back to the Van Eyck painting I showed you, that was really as detailed as these. These are just more soft and pretty and beautiful and lovely, but I love these artists. All right, so 1826, this guy and a French scientist was able to actually take the first photograph, which is, this is it on the left, and that is him on the right with his super duper camera. And so in 1826, we have photography coming on the scene, but it's not in people's hands taking pictures of their family like for casual fun yet. Really, we do see some, professional family portraits coming on the scene in the 1850s, but it's really not a household object yet, and we don't really see a lot of change in art yet. But we have this guy, Edward Muybridge, come on the scene and start studying human motion. Muybridge wasn't an artist, he was a scientist, and he started to use cameras to study how animals and humans move. So he would put up all these trip lines, and behind this naked guy jumping around is a huge chart with graphs, and he would really chart human and animal motion and see, what does it look like when someone's running? What does it look like when someone's jumping? And eventually kind of accidentally invented cinema, because when he strung these images together and spun them around, they became animated, and it was the first time we saw moving pictures. So Edward Muybridge on the scene, but still just we see this becoming a scientific endeavor and not so much of an artistic endeavor. But one of the things Muybridge did that's really cool is, up until this time, if you wanted to look at an image of someone holding, a jar on their shoulder naked, as an artist to draw or paint them, you literally needed to hire someone to stand there. Well, when these photographs became published, people were able to look at human bodies and really, without a model, being able to draw and paint people from different angles, because Muybridge would study people from different angles at the same time. And you'll see a lot of that with people like Francis Bacon. You can even recognize some of these images in his work, but a lot of artists use Muybridge's photos in their own work. Okay, so modernism, and this is really the age that the camera ushered in. Within modernism, we have pretty much everything you're going to look at in a museum that isn't religious or historical art. So everything from 1860 to 1970, and those are not hard dates because it happened kind of gradually as the camera became more popularized. But one of the things we see is, and I listed a whole bunch of different art styles here that you'll see: minimalism, abstract expressionism, impressionism, futurism, cubism, performance art, installation art, pop art, ready-made art, environmental art. All these things fit into modernism. And you might think, what happened to art? When did it become so bad? And it's because the purpose of art changed. And that is because when the camera could suddenly make something look more realistic than any artist could, it kind of put artists out of a job. But good things happened. And this actually speaks to our modern age with AI coming on the scene and electronic art. What do we do when suddenly an invention turns everything upside down for artists? And let's see what happens. So one of the first groups of artists to really start to experiment with color and light after the advent of the camera were the Impressionists. On the far left here, my right and left are mixed up because of my camera is flipped. So over this way, you're looking at an Impressionist painting by Georges Seurat, and it is lots of little specks of light and color. And on the right, what you're seeing is a digital image blown up. Notice they look a lot alike. And we started to have some other scientific discoveries kind of alongside the camera. One is that we see with rods and cones with little specks of color. And when we started to understand that we see in specks of color, the Impressionists started to paint in ways where they broke apart light into little specks and dashes and dabs of color instead of trying to blend everything together. Because this is really how we see. And this digital image on the right is kind of showing you that. When you zoom way in on something, it becomes pixelated. And when you zoom out, all those colors kind of fit together and look all beautiful. So once again, we have the Pointillists, which were Impressionists, Georges Seurat, and all these other great dudes making art. So we have, I added a whole bunch of other information here if you want to go back through and read through this. But basically, all this information talks about how color theory and the invention, not the invention of the camera, but also the discovery of how we see and how light works really inspired and also validated what the Impressionists were doing. So if you want to go back and read this, you can. One of the phrases that really I thought was super cool in here was broken color and brushwork. And you really see that in these Seurat paintings. So this is a close-up of a really, really huge painting, the size of an entire wall in a museum. But look at the broken little specks of color. But when you zoom way out on these paintings, it starts to look pretty realistic. This Seurat painting, if you look, we're zoomed way out, you can see the guy we were just looking at in the bottom left-hand side, this guy right here. And when you zoom in, it just kind of looks flat and terrible. But when you zoom out, he's pretty dimensional and a lot of interesting light things happening. And it kind of gives you that vibe of a brilliant summer day where the light is so bright that we see things in kind of these extreme lights and darks. And when you zoom way in, we see these little patches of color and it kind of breaks down. So why am I showing you this? Because the camera made artists say, okay, for one thing, we've learned that we see things in dashes, and color photography did not exist at this time, by the way. So the Impressionists started to say, well, if the camera can draw and paint more realistically than we can, we'll take photographs better than we can draw or paint. What are we going to do? And one of the things they started to do is explore and experiment with color more intensely than really had ever been done before. So technology pushed art in a new direction because it freed artists in a way to experiment and discover and become explorers and not just documenters, where before art was about documenting. Whether it was a famous portrait of someone who commissioned you to paint their wife or their daughter or their king, suddenly artists were freed up to experiment and do different things. And we start to see very mark-making portraits like this one here, and beautiful pointillist paintings like we're seeing here. And this is Impressionism that we're looking at right here. So when you hear names like Monet, Seurat, Manet, Cézanne, Degas, Renoir, Van Gogh, sorry if my French accent isn't as authentic as it could be, but I'm working on it. This is all experimenting with light and color. Why? Because the camera came on the scene. And after this, art explodes into different directions because suddenly artists are freed up to explore, but also they need to find out what should we be doing since the camera kicks our butts in some ways. And we talked about Muybridge, studying human motion. Okay, so this guy, Marcel Duchamp, decides, I'm sick of Impressionism and I have started doing more interesting things. And so Duchamp, and I've actually painted this urinal, I think I have a slide coming up of it, takes a urinal, men urinate in these in bathrooms, and hangs it up in a group impressionist show, basically to say, I think all this impressionist work is crap. Literally, piss. Hangs this up in a gallery and causes a near riot. He signs it with a fake name, R. Mutt, which is kind of the idea that I am a dog or I am a mutt. And he calls it fountain because it would produce water, and he's taking something from real life and saying, this is art because I have seen it as something that it was not before. And this is an artist that also experimented with painting and movement in painting, and a great painting called Nude Descending a Staircase, which also caused outrage. And ready-made sculptures where he would sometimes find an object and just decide this is art all by itself because it's such a cool object, and would just sign his name to it and call it art. This was an outrage to so many people. But what was Duchamp doing? He was exploring what can art be that it has not been in the past. And some of his ready-mades were just objects he found, and some of them where he would destroy the purpose of both objects, like this stool. Now you can't sit on the stool because there's a bicycle wheel on it, and you can't ride the bicycle because it is now stuck to a stationary object of a stool. And so now it's neither a bicycle or a stool, it's something new. And he would force people to look at the beauty of everyday objects in these ready-mades. So Marcel Duchamp. Okay, and on the left is his Nude Descending a Staircase. On the right is a modern day photo example of what the heck he was doing. It's showing what a nude person in time lapse might look like walking down the stairs. And you can see this on the left. People looked at this painting and their heads exploded. Now we would just be like, oh yeah, that's kind of interesting. I've seen it a million times. But you did not when Duchamp painted this. And what was he doing? I'm exploring what is motion. What does a body look like stretched out over time as it's going downstairs? How can I break this into facets and angles and planes to show the human body in a way that you haven't seen it before? So outside of the historical context, you might not be blown away, but in the historical context, this was mind-blowing work. And it's pretty beautiful, and the movement has a lot of flow to it as well. And if you're still going, what is it? Look on the right and you can kind of see what a woman would look like moving down a flight of stairs. You can kind of get that motion. So, and this is my painting of Duchamp on the bottom left, by the way, with fountain, and I even included his R. Mutt signature. Also a chess master and known for smoking his pipe and doing a lot of avant-garde things, making strange films, but looking, to us, looks just like some kind of normal old guy. But at the time, this guy's a genius and just changing the world with his ideas. So Duchamp, one of the reasons I painted Duchamp is because I feel like he changed the world as we know it, and made the world we know now, but at the time kind of broke the mold. All right. And I apologize. It says Picasso age 13 to 15. It's kind of out of frame. So by the ages of 13 to 15, Picasso could draw and paint uber realistically. So what did he do as the camera came onto the scene? Well, it freed him up to be able to do whatever he wanted. Now, I still think it's incredibly important to be able to draw what you see, to be able to really render realistically, because then you are free to do whatever you want, to know all those techniques. How do I make something look three-dimensional or small or far away from me? How do I get perspective correct? And then we can be incredibly creative. So we see this in Picasso's work. So Picasso went from this sort of work to this sort of work, which is just what he's known for. Basically invented collage. Now, One thing you might not know about Picasso is he is credited for stealing a lot of people's ideas and then doing them better than the people he stole them from, or at least popularizing them. A lot of these ideas were also similar, if not stolen, or mutually created at the same time as an artist named George Braque, who also was doing cubist things like Picasso. But Picasso also, like Duchamp, exploring human motion. What does it look like when someone's crying hysterically? And how can I show someone from different angles at the same time to make you feel like you're experiencing what's happening? Or how can I make a guitar out of paper that also has some dimensionality to it and is a sculpture, but also shows you what a guitar does, and it kind of has that resonance that a guitar would have if you strummed it loudly? Or what does music sound like when it's coming from people playing it in this bottom central piece? Or what would women look like if they're bathing and drying themselves off in motion all at the same time? So we see artists exploring new ideas. So when you're looking at art, think about it being a secret language that you need to decode. And if you can understand what that artist is exploring at that time, you can suddenly enter into a new world that you might currently not have access to. And it can become a really exciting, magical place because suddenly you're seeing what this artist is exploring. Now, sometimes what they're exploring isn't very exciting, or it is no longer relevant. But if you understand that that artist lived in a time and a space where they were exploring these new ideas and figuring out what is the purpose of art, and also what could I explore as an artist in a new way, it becomes pretty exciting. And Picasso is one of my favorites because he just never really edited himself. He just made it and then decided if he was going to show it or not. So incredibly prolific artist, meaning he made tons and tons of stuff. All right, Jackson Pollock exploring what can I do with paint that does not involve a subject, literally pouring paint on the floor or splashing it on the wall. Now, we have seen this so many times now. I'm so sick of it over and over and over again. But Pollock did it first. And really, again, mind-blowing work, made people angry. And he's painting this with house paint in a barn, on a floor, pouring house paint on a canvas, not grinding his own pigments like the Impressionists would have, or not buying the incredibly expensive gallery archival paints from the art store like we might today. But he's like, house paint will work just fine, and just pouring it on the ground and exploring rhythm and pattern and movement, and what can paint itself do? What kind of marks can paint make, as opposed to how do I make paint look like a barn or look like a rose? He is exploring what can paint do itself. How can I make pattern and rhythm with paint and pouring it and throwing it? Okay, this actually is near where I live. This one installation was done, and these umbrellas were set up by an artist named Christo. And Christo worked with someone named Jean-Claude, who's kind of his partner in crime and in life, and would transform our reality. So this is a very interesting idea. Like, how can I take something people see every day and make them see it in a new way? By hiding it. Like, I'm quite sure this is Notre Dame Cathedral in the upper left-hand corner that he completely covered up. Or how can I take a canyon that people walk through and add fabric to it to make it no longer look like it normally looks, or fill an area with colorful umbrellas? And these areas are areas, one is in Japan and one is in California, that is known for having flower blooms, and he's adding colors that you would normally see from these flowers in the form of umbrellas. So Christo is asking the question, how can I change an actual environment or a building or a space and make you experience it differently? Okay, Dali, one of my favorite artists of all time, asking questions like, how can I take something that you might see every day and make you see it in a way that you might see it in a nightmare, or put things together that should never go together, or make art that you might see in dreams come to real life. Now, this is before any kind of digital work existed, and what we're seeing with Dali is art that was what we call surreal. So an alternate reality or a dreamlike type of art that did not exist anywhere except in his own mind. Now, he's not the only surrealist, but he's probably the best known surrealist, putting a lobster on a telephone. Or what I like about this piece on the bottom left is he's taking the camera. Now, he's not really known for his photography. He's more like, hey, what if I took a photo that didn't look like the photo? So remember, cameras suddenly changed reality because they made artists have to find new ways to do things. So this guy is saying, well, since a camera makes things look real, what if I took a photo that showed an alternate reality? So this is a really incredible concept. So in this bottom left, we're seeing Dali posing in a top hat with a cane with a skull behind him. But the skull isn't a skull. The skull is nude women forming a skull. So the photograph is not showing reality. It's showing what really isn't there, but what's in his own imagination. And it's taking something that doesn't really look like a skull and making us see it as a skull, like you would in the center frame. You can see that that skull looks a lot like those women. And instead of being in a formal portrait with a skull, which was kind of something we see over and over again, he's giving us a photo of something that isn't actually happening and making us see it differently. Or clocks that are melting, or horses with legs as tiny as praying mantises, or things like that. So what can I do to change the reality or give you an alternate reality or let you into my nightmares? Surrealism, Salvador Dali. Hell yeah. Okay, here's some more Dali photos. And these are also completely changing what we're seeing here. Let me get over here. So these photos were done with an artist named Jean Cocteau, who is a film director and an avant-garde artist. And if you have not seen The Beauty and the Beast by Jean Cocteau, stop what you're doing and go watch it. Life-changing. I'll see if I can find a link to it, and I'll add it to this post if I can. But once again, photos document reality. They show us history, right? So as an artist, how can I use this new tool in a way that it was never intended to be used? So instead of, hey, here's a picture of me in my living room, here's a photo of me walking up my wall with a naked upside down man on my ceiling around a clock. And so, he's taking a room and setting it up sideways. Obviously that wall is the floor, but he's breaking the purpose of the camera as an artist. So he's using technology in a way it was not intended to be used. Or how can I make it look like I have multiple arms in a very realistic way? And how can I document something that isn't actually happening? Like I don't really have all these arms, but using photography in a way it wasn't intended to use, he does have all these arms. Let me see if I can click back over here. All right. Or what does it look like if my cats are flying through my room and there's water moving across my room and I'm floating through the room while I'm painting a painting? So once again, breaking the purpose of the camera. As an artist, how can we use technology in a way it was not intended to be used? So this is really what we do as artists, is we take things and find new ways to look at them or use them. And that's what I love about Dali. All right, so we see a lot of art like this in museums, and my students get so mad because they're thinking, this is total crap. I'm going to turn my small camera off for a second. All right, so how can I create art with line and color? Color, I'm sorry, is off screen there. But basically, these artists are just exploring those very simple questions. This kind of art would be considered minimalism, and it's where you're doing as little as possible, but still making the art interesting. A lot of my students would say, Mr. Ellis, it is not interesting. This art sucks. But you will see art like this on people's walls. I actually love a lot of the Mondrian color fields or the Mark Rothkos, where you've got the simple colors fading from one to another. And if you know what to look for in these pieces, art historians can go on and on about it, but there's some interesting things about how colors interact, or if that cube is reflecting everything around it, suddenly you walk by it and you're in the piece of art, and it's not just a cube, it's a cube where you are repeated throughout the room multiple times. Or when you look at a color long enough, you'll see the opposite color on a white wall. And there's a lot of interesting things that happen, like with moire patterns, like in the central piece. But the minimalists were exploring that idea of how little can I do and still make something interesting. So this is, again, my very simplified version of what the heck is going on with all these artists. Artists are exploring ideas about what art can be since the advent of the camera. All right, so that's really my take on what modernism is. And I think I am going to change, do a second video, because this went a lot longer than I expected, and talk about postmodernism, which is the era we're in now. I think we're actually entering a new era now with AI, where I think we're going to find some new wordage and verbiage used for the era we're in now. But we'll talk about postmodernism next time. But basically, the camera changed art forever by changing the purpose of what artists do and freed them up to explore radical ideas, and also kind of put them out of a job by being better at portraiture and documenting history and teaching people by images than artists could do on their own. So that is basically what I would say modernism is. Remember, we did see the advent of the printing press, and which did radically change things. So a lot of times we'll see a huge invention that changes the way art is made and what the purpose of art is made. So we talked about the printing press, the camera, and now we're going to talk about some new things in postmodernism. So if you liked my video, I'm actually going to switch over here real quick to my bigger screen. If you like this video, please hit like and subscribe. Feel free to share. I'd love that. If you want to make comments, I'd love to hear your comments too. This video might piss some people off who know a lot more about art history than me. It's very simplified. I combined all sorts of things that shouldn't be combined and oversimplified, but I think it's easy to kind of think about those big ideas in the way I presented them. Let me know what you think, and I will see you next time. Tim Ellis, over and out.